"The howl of 1,000 voices is the lament of death," Axinia whispered, the icy air tearing at her throat as the circle of hungry eyes closed in. Each breath was a cloud of despair at 71 Didax, the ground trembling not only with the steps of 1,200 hungry wolves, but with the fury of nature itself. She was alone, the last hope of her people, and what she was about to discover in the heart of that blizzard would redefine what it meant to survive. Despite the terror clutching her chest, Axinia felt something different. It wasn't just the ancestral fear of the predator, but a strange resonance in the howls, a tone of urgency that transcended mere hunting. Her eyes, accustomed to deciphering the tundra's secrets, began to notice patterns in the pack's movement. The wolves were not surrounding her with the intent to attack immediately. Instead, they formed a semicircle, their flanks open to the white vastness. There was a dance there, a brutal ballet, but she was not its center. With her heart pounding, Axinia forced herself to look beyond the incandescent eyes fixed on her. Her gaze swept the icy landscape, and then she saw it. A colossal shadow, almost indistinguishable in the blinding whiteness, moved with majestic yet desperate slowness. It was an ice buffalo of mythical proportions, a 5,000-kilo giant, its fur matted with snow and horns that rose like ancient tree branches. The air around it seemed to vibrate with its mass and silent struggle. Axinia shuddered, not from fear, but from a sudden understanding. The wolf pack hadn't ambushed her. She had, by chance, stumbled into the middle of an epic hunt. The wolves were cornering the beast, and the desperation she'd sensed in them was the same that gnawed at her own people's guts. Hunger. That buffalo wasn't just meat, it was the promise of life, both for the wolves and for her village. A wave of relief, and paradoxically, a new and overwhelming responsibility washed over her. Her wrinkled fingers tightened around the handle of her ice axe, a gift from her grandfather, carved from obsidian and mammoth bones. There was no time to hesitate. The sight of that animal, a living legend, and the hungry pack represented a chance for salvation. Axinia closed her eyes for an instant, taking a deep breath of the biting air. Images of Axinia's children, with their pale faces and hunger-hollowed eyes, flooded her mind. She felt the weight of their hope, the faith placed in her calloused hands. Her sharp intuition, forged by decades of life on the tundra, began to map the terrain in her mind. She observed the wolves' tactics, the way they moved in unison, the calculated patience of each one. This wasn't a direct confrontation, it was a strategy of exhaustion. And Axinia, the elder whom many would underestimate, realized she could use that same strategy. She would not fight against nature, but with it. Her plan began to form, a web of cunning and ancient knowledge. She would move like a shadow, taking advantage of the imminent chaos of the hunt, to claim her share of that frozen bounty. Her dry lips curved into a silent determination. Hope, fragile as thin ice, had returned. Hope, fragile as thin ice, had returned. But Axinia knew that hope alone fed no one. With her lips still curved in determination, she moved. Each step was calculated, each breath a conscious effort not to break the deadly silence of the tundra. She wasn't a warrior, but a shadow, an almost invisible part of the frozen landscape. Her eyes, now more than ever, were her guides. They swept the scene, absorbing every detail, the slope of the terrain, the depth of the snow, the wind's direction carrying the pungent scent of the buffalo and the warm breath of the wolves. The 1,200 wolves, a grey and white tide, continued their exhausting dance. They didn't attack en masse, but in waves, nipping at the buffalo's flanks, retreating, then advancing again. It was a strategy of patience and persistence, designed to exhaust the animal's colossal strength. The ice buffalo, despite its impressive mass, began to show signs of fatigue. Its movements, once majestic, grew slower, its breath heavier. It swung its head, enormous horns sweeping the air, but the energy in its blows diminished. Axinia felt a tightness in her chest, watching the buffaloes struggle. It wasn't just an animal to her. It was a force of nature, a spirit of the tundra. But the hunger of her people was equally a force, a primal need. She remembered her grandmother's words, "Nature gives and nature takes, but the wise find balance in between." Her plan wasn't about confrontation, but coexistence, about finding a gap in the brutality of survival. She crawled, using the small rises in the terrain and wind-twisted bushes as cover. Her aged body, despite aching joints, moved with the agility of a young huntress, driven by urgency. The furs covering her blended perfectly with the snow and ice, making her almost imperceptible. Her ears caught the crackle of ice under the wolves' paws, the buffalo's hoarse grunts, the rustle of the wind. She waited, observing the pattern, seeking the moment of weakness, the chink in the hunt's armor. The buffalo finally staggered, its forelegs gave way, and it dropped to its knees in the deep snow, a tremor running through its gigantic body. The wolves, who sensing imminent victory, intensified their attacks but still maintained a cautious distance, awaiting the final collapse. It was at that precise instant, when the pack's attention was divided between the buffalo's exhaustion and the preparation for the final lunge, that Axinia acted. Like a bolt of shadow, she darted forward, not towards the wolves, but to the buffalo's rear, where the snow was deepest and the predator's attention less focused. With astonishing precision, she raised her ice axe. It wasn't a blow of fury, but of necessity and respect. The buffalo, already on the verge of collapse, offered no significant resistance to that swift, surgical intervention. Axinia wasn't aiming for the animal's complete death at that moment, but for the separation of a vital portion, a piece that could be removed without compromising the wolves' prey. She focused on the most accessible part, using her strength and knowledge to cut off a substantial piece of meat and fat, essential for her village's survival. In a matter of seconds, with the skill of one who had done this hundreds of times, she succeeded. A generous piece, still warm, was carefully wrapped in a reindeer hide she carried. The wolves, absorbed in their own hunt, barely noticed the slender figure who slipped away as silently as she had arrived. Axinia felt the weight of the meat on her back, a burden that was, in fact, a blessing. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from deep gratitude and overwhelming relief. She had succeeded. The village would be saved. Now, the journey back. The cold seemed even more biting, but hope, once fragile, now burned like a strong ember in her chest. The faces of the children, the promise of a tomorrow, propelled her forward, one step at a time, through the white immensity. The journey back was a heavier burden than the buffalo itself. Each of Axinia's steps sank into the virgin snow, and the piece of meat, though a blessing, seemed to multiply its weight with every meter traveled. The cold, once an enemy to be defied, now seeped into her bones, a constant piercing ache. Her muscles, already exhausted from the hunt, protested with every movement, but she couldn't stop. The pale faces of Axinia's children, the mothers with eyes hollowed by worry, the image of the village silenced by hunger, all this propelled her. She gritted her teeth, the vapor of her breath freezing on the few eyelashes that time and wind hadn't torn away. Axinia felt the reindeer hide, wrapping the damp, cold meat against her back, a constant reminder of her victory and her responsibility. The subtle scent of blood and wild animal mingled with the icy air, and she wondered if the wolves, now sated with their own portion of the buffalo, might pick up her trail. A shiver ran down her spine, but she ignored it. There was no room for fear now, only for perseverance. Her eyes, accustomed to the gloom of the Yakutian winter, swept the white horizon, searching for any landmark, any sign that she was on the right path. The vastness was cruel in its beauty, a seemingly endless sea of ice and snow. The elder stumbled, her foot catching on a treacherous snowdrift. She fell to her knees, the impact making her gasp. The meat on her back seemed to pull her further down. For an instant, the temptation to stay there, to succumb to the overwhelming exhaustion, was almost unbearable. Her shoulders trembled, and a tear, quickly frozen, ran down her weathered face. But then she saw, not a clear image but the shadow of a memory, her grandmother, with the same determination in her ancient eyes, teaching her the art of tracking, the wisdom of respecting the tundra, the strength of never giving up. Axinia, life is a frozen river. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. You must break the ice to drink, no matter how thick the layer. With a groan of effort, Axinia pushed herself up. Every joint screamed, but the flame of hope in her chest burned brighter. She adjusted the burden, tightening the straps with her gloved hands. The village wasn't so far now. She could feel it, a slight shift in the wind, an almost imperceptible scent of wood smoke, a premonition that only years of life on the tundra could grant. She imagined the warmth of the fire, the laughter of the children, the relief in her people's eyes. Those images were her fuel, her inner warmth against the cold that threatened to consume her. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, a spectacle of brutal beauty that seemed to mock her misery. The temperature would drop even further with darkness. She needed to quicken her pace. Axinia began to sing softly, an ancient hunting song, a melody her mother had taught her. The words were about the strength of the bear, the cunning of the fox, the resilience of the Yakutian people. The song was a balm for her weary soul, a rhythm for her slow steps, a way to ward off the oppressive solitude of the white immensity. She wasn't alone. The spirits of her ancestors walked with her, and the hope of her people guided her. Finally, as the darkness of night had already swallowed most of the landscape, Axinia saw it, a faint flickering light on the horizon, a distant but real promise. The village. A deep sigh escaped her lips, mingling with the vapor in the air. Her legs felt like lead, but a new vigor born from the sight propelled her. She wasn't just Axinia, the weary elder. She was the bearer of life, the guardian of hope. With her heart overflowing with an emotion that mixed exhaustion, triumph, and an unwavering love for her people, she continued, one step at a time, towards the light. Her mission almost accomplished. The flickering light of the village, once a distant mirage, now sharp, revealed the snow-covered yurts. Axinia felt a shiver of emotion. The sight of warmth and people propelled her, her eyes, blurred, fixed on the entrance. She heard barking and murmurs. When Axinia reached the frozen palisade, her knees threatened to give way. A young guard, thin-faced, was the first to see her. He blinked, incredulous, before shouting, "Axinia, she's back!" The shout echoed. In seconds, the village, previously in despair, erupted. Hide doors swung open, and figures emerged, faces lit by hope. Hungry children ran first, stopping at a distance. Axinia, with her heavy burden, felt the wave of emotion. She was the promise of life. Mothers, faces etched with worry, approached. Lena, whose child was the weakest, brought her hands to her mouth, a sob of relief escaping her. Axinia stopped in the center of the clearing, the vapor of her breath thick. Her arms trembled as she, with a final effort, unfastened the ties and let the colossal piece of meat fall onto the snow. The dull thud was a silent thunderclap, and a chorus of exclamations and gasps filled the air. It was enormous, a gift from the tundra. Elders, wrinkled faces approached. "An ice buffalo," whispered Yegor. "A legend." She brought a legend. As the people gathered, hesitant fingers touching the icy meat, Axinia felt exhaustion overcome her. Her knees gave way, and she sank onto the snow, head bowed. The furs seemed to weigh tons, and every muscle screamed. On her face, despite the exhaustion, there was a faint smile of peace and triumph. She had fulfilled her promise. Immediately, gentle hands helped her up. Lena, eyes brimming with tears, led her into her yurt, the warmest one. Other women hurried to light fires and prepare tools. The men, with renewed energy, began to work on the meat, knowing that every piece was precious. The scent of fresh meat mingled with the aroma of smoke, a perfume of hope long unfelt. Inside the yurt, Axinia sat by the fire, its warmth enveloping her. Lena removed her gloves and boots, massaging her feet and hands with warm oil. "You saved us, Axinia," Lena whispered. Axinia merely nodded, unable to speak. Her eyes scanned the interior, seeing the faces of the children who watched her with admiration. She felt love and gratitude. The sound of sharp knives cutting meat echoed from outside. Soon, steaming broth would be served and hunger banished. Axinia closed her eyes, the warmth of the fire and the gratitude of her people warming her. True strength, she thought, wasn't in fighting against nature, but in understanding it, finding life in desolation. She had rewritten the legend, not with violence, but with wisdom, altruism, and human connection. The village, once silent and despairing, now buzzed with the promise of life, a testament to the resilience and courage of an elder. The scent of fresh meat, mingled with the warmth of fires crackling with new intensity, was a long-forgotten perfume, a balm for hungry souls. The men, with sharp knives and agile hands, worked under the flickering torchlight, dividing the colossal piece of buffalo. Each cut was made with reverence, each portion an invaluable treasure. The women, with tears of relief in their eyes, prepared the cauldrons, heating water for the first substantial broth in weeks, their voices low and full of new vigor. Inside Lena's yurt, the fire danced merrily, casting warm shadows on the hide walls. Axinia, seated on soft furs, felt the warmth penetrate her bones, chasing away the cold that seemed to have rooted itself in her soul. Lena, kneeling at her feet, massaged her wrinkled hands with a fragrant herbal oil, while one of the children, little Kael, 6 years old, watched Axinia with wide eyes of admiration, as if before a legendary figure, a hero from ancient tales. The elder smiled faintly, exhaustion still weighing on her eyelids, but a deep peace filling her heart. "You brought us life, Axinia," Lena whispered, her voice choked with emotion, looking up to meet the elder's wise eyes. "There are no words to express our gratitude for this miracle." Axinia merely squeezed Lena's hand, a silent gesture that spoke volumes about love and sacrifice. She sought no praise. Her reward was the sight of less pale faces, the promise of children's laughter that would soon echo again through the village paths. Outside, the village's hum was a melody of hope, the sound of hatchets splitting wood, the voices of men discussing the best way to preserve the meat, the cry of a baby that for the first time in a long time wasn't a cry of hunger, but of a minor discomfort that would soon be met with warmth and food. It was life returning, a strong and vibrant pulse against the frozen immensity of the outside world, a reminder that the community had prevailed. The village elders, led by Yegor, came to Axinia's yurt. Their faces, once marked by worry and the shadow of hunger, now bore an expression of solemn respect and relief. Yegor, with his white beard and hoarse voice, bowed slightly. "Axinia, you are the heart of Axinia," he said, using the village's name to honor her and her deep connection to the people. "Your wisdom and courage saved us from darkness. The legend of the ice buffalo now has your name etched into it forever." Axinia felt a warmth in her chest, a sense of duty fulfilled. It wasn't vanity, but the confirmation that her sacrifice had been worthwhile. She thought of the wolves, of their own desperate hunt, and how nature in its brutality also offered paths to survival, provided there was mutual understanding and respect. The 5,000-kilo buffalo, a source of life for so many, was proof that the interconnectedness of all creatures was a sacred and complex cycle. Soon, the first steaming broth was brought into the yurt. The rich, comforting aroma filled the air, making stomachs rumble with an almost forgotten sound. Kyle, who was still near Axinia, extended a trembling little hand for the bowl Lena offered him, his large, hungry eyes shining with pure joy. Axinia watched him, an overwhelming emotion rising in her throat. To see hope reborn in a child's eyes was, for her, the greatest reward, the true meaning of her existence. She took her own bowl, her hands still slightly trembling, but steady. The first sip of warm broth went down her throat, a nectar of life that warmed her body and soul. It was more than food. It was the promise of a tomorrow, proof that even in the harshest winter, the flame of life could be rekindled by courage, altruism, and unwavering love. Axinia's village had been saved, and the legend of its elder Axinia would be told for generations, a beacon of hope in the icy vastness. That night, the sound of laughter and voices full of life filled the air, replacing the oppressive silence of hunger. The fires burned brighter, and the smell of cooked meat hung over the yurts, an aroma that warmed the soul as much as the body. Inside Lena's yurt, Axinia watched Kyle and the other children devour the steaming broth, their faces smeared with grease and their eyes shining with a joy long unseen. The elder felt a lump in her throat, a mix of relief and a deep exhaustion that threatened to drag her into a dreamless sleep. Lena, with a gentle smile, brought her more broth, and Axinia drank, feeling energy slowly return to her weary muscles. The days that followed were of hard work and restrained celebration. The ice buffalo had provided a quantity of meat the village had never dreamed of having all at once. The men worked tirelessly, cutting, slicing, and preparing the meat under the guidance of the elders. The women, in turn, organized the preservation process, knowledge passed down from generation to generation. Part of the meat was salted and hung to dry in the freezing wind, turning into tough, nutritious strips. Another part was buried in deep snow, where the extreme cold would keep it frozen for months, like a natural storehouse. The fat was rendered and stored in hide pouches, a valuable resource for cooking and for keeping furs soft. The joy of abundance, however, brought with it a new layer of responsibility. Yegor, the eldest elder after Axinia, called a meeting in the center of the village, days after the hunt. The fire crackled in the central brazier, illuminating the serious faces of the adults. "Axinia has brought us an unprecedented gift," Yegor began, his grave voice echoing in the cold air. "But with such a gift comes a challenge. How do we ensure this meat feeds us not just today, but until the sun truly returns and the earth offers us new fruits? How do we avoid waste or letting abundance make us careless?" A murmur ran through the assembly. Some young people, full of newfound energy, suggested more frequent feasts. Others, older and more cautious, advocated for even stricter rationing, fearing that the abundance was merely a brief respite. Discord, subtle as the wind whispering through the yurt hides, began to settle in. Axinia, who had listened in silence until then, felt the weight of the new concern. It wasn't the direct threat of hunger, but the threat of disunity, of a lack of foresight. Her eyes, which had seen the deadly dance of the wolves and the majesty of the buffalo, now saw the fragility of human hope in the face of uncertainty. She rose slowly, her wrinkles deeper in the firelight. All eyes turned to her, seeking the wisdom that had guided her through danger. "The buffalo taught us that life is a cycle," Axinia began, her voice calm but firm. "The wolves and we all seek to survive. Nature gave us this gift, but also gave us the mind to use it wisely. We cannot drown in abundance, nor lose ourselves in fear. We must honor this gift with discipline and sharing." She extended her hand to Yegor, and then to Lena, who stood beside her. "Each of us has a role, the strongest to work the meat, the wisest to guide the sharing, the women to prepare and nurture, the children to remind us why we do all this. Axinia proposed a system of communal storage and rationing based on the oldest traditions, but adapted to the scale of the new provision. She spoke of building a new, deeper, and safer ice storage facility for the frozen meat, and of the need for each family to contribute their time and effort. Her gestures were slow and deliberate, her words a balm for their worries. The murmur ceased, replaced by thoughtful silence. Axinia's wisdom wasn't just about hunting, but about governing, about keeping the fabric of the community intact. The true challenge, she realized, wasn't just bringing food, but nurturing the hope and unity of her people. The village had overcome hunger, but now faced the test of prosperity and management, a test of its collective resilience. The morning after Axinia presented her plan, a new fervor swept through the village. The proposal for a deeper, safer ice storage facility and the meticulous organization of tasks for each family brought clarity and a renewed sense of purpose. The men, with axes and improvised shovels, began to excavate the frozen ground, the hard earth yielding inch by inch to their combined effort. The rhythmic sound of tools against the ice was a new melody, replacing the silence of despair. The women, under Lena's watchful eye, continued the work of salting and drying the meat, their hands agile and their faces marked by concentration and hope. The scent of sweat and earth mingled with the aroma of meat and smoke, a perfume of resilience and renewed life. Axinia watched it all from her yurt, feeling the community's vibration. Her eyes, once focused on the white vastness and imminent threat, now lingered on the details of the collective work, on the expressions of each face. She saw determination, solidarity, but also perceived the first subtle cracks in the surface of their unity, like fine lines in the ice. A young hunter, Boris, known for his impetuosity and newfound energy, grumbled to his companions about the amount of work, suggesting that the meat should be consumed more freely now that it was available. "Why so much effort and restriction?" he questioned with a tone of impatience. "If hunger has already been banished and we have so much?" His voice, though low, reached Yegor's keen ears, who approached with slow, deliberate steps, his imposing figure casting a shadow on the frozen ground. "Boris," Yegor said, his voice calm, but imbued with an authority that came from years of experience and respect. "The true hunt doesn't end with the kill. It continues in the wisdom of managing what nature offers us, and in the discipline of thinking about tomorrow." He gestured towards the storage facility under construction, his gloved hands pointing to the collective effort. "This isn't just a hole in the ice. It's a vault for our children's future, for the winters to come, and for the memory of Axinia's sacrifice." Boris lowered his eyes, shamed by the gentle reprimand, and returned to work with renewed vigor, his shovel striking the ice with more force. Axinia, witnessing Yegor's intervention, felt a warmth in her chest, a deep relief. She wasn't alone in the task of guiding her people through the new challenges. The ancestral wisdom, shared among the elders, was the unshakable foundation of the village, the invisible thread that kept everyone connected. She remembered her grandmother's words about the importance of community, how each thread, however fragile it seemed, was essential to the strength and integrity of the web that bound them. Prosperity, she realized, was as great a test as scarcity, demanding not only discipline, but a sense of collective purpose and a shared vision. Days turned into weeks of hard work and cooperation. The ice storage facility was finally completed, an impressive structure of tunnels and chambers excavated into the permafrost, lined with firs and insulated with compacted snow, a true marvel of engineering and community effort. The meat, carefully prepared and portioned, was stored there, a frozen treasure that represented the village's security and hope. The rationing, though still present and necessary, was fair and transparent, ensuring that no one went hungry. but also that the precious provision would last through the long winter months yet to come. The children, with renewed energy from food and the warmth of home, returned to playing in the snow, their joyful laughter echoing through the yurts, a sound that was music to Aksinia's ears. Kyle, the little one Aksinia had seen with such hope in his eyes, now ran with a vitality that warmed the elder's heart, a symbol of the life that had been restored. He and the others helped with small tasks, carrying firewood or fetching water, learning early the value of work and contribution to the common good. Aksinia, though still feeling the weight of exhaustion from her great journey, found new purpose in guiding and advising. She spent hours telling ancient stories to the young, not just about hunts and tundra spirits, but about the importance of patience, cooperation, altruism, and deep respect for nature. Her words were seeds planted in fertile soil, ensuring that her people's wisdom would not be lost, but would flourish in the new generations. Aksinia's village, strengthened by adversity and united by a common purpose, flourished under the wise leadership of its elder and the unwavering unity of its people. Hunger had been overcome, and prosperity, managed with wisdom, promised a safer future, a vibrant testament to collective resilience and the power of human connection. There was a renewed energy, almost an effervescence, especially among the young hunters. They, who had felt the weight of hunger most intensely, now seemed driven by a desire to go beyond mere subsistence. Aksinia saw them gathered, their voices animated, their gestures broad, as they discussed hunting maps and animal tracks that weren't those of the ice buffalo. She realized that abundance, though a relief, also brought a new form of restlessness. The monotony of the days, once broken by the urgency of survival, now seemed to weigh on some young hearts. One day, Boris, the same young hunter Yegor had gently reprimanded, approached Aksinia's yurt, accompanied by two other young men, their faces filled with a mix of respect and audacity. Boris held a rudimentary map made of hide, his fingers tracing imaginary lines on its surface. "Aksinia," he began, his voice a little louder than usual. "We, the younger ones, have been talking. The village is safe, the storage is full, but there's much more to the tundra than just meat to eat. There are rare furs. There are tracks of swift animals that would test our skill, that would bring honor to the village." He gestured to the map. "We want to organize a longer expedition to the north, where they say the Arctic foxes with the whitest and densest fur live. It would be a hunt for glory, to show our strength and skill, and to bring new furs for the deepening winter." Aksinia listened in silence, her eyes fixed on his. She saw the gleam of ambition, the thirst for adventure that was natural in youth, but she also saw the risk, the recklessness that could accompany such enthusiasm. Yegor, who was nearby working on a snow trap, paused, his eyes narrowed in concern. He approached slowly, his presence imposing. "Boris," Yegor said, his voice calm but with a tone of warning, "the tundra is vast and treacherous. Glory is an empty meal if the village's safety is compromised. Our focus must be preservation, the maintenance of what Aksinia brought us, not the pursuit of furs that are not essential for our survival." A tense silence hung in the air. Aksinia felt the weight of the decision. It was a conflict between the tradition of caution and the aspiration for new challenges, between collective safety and the individual pursuit of recognition. She understood both sides. Youth needed purpose to test its limits, but the village needed unity and wisdom. She rose, her movement slow and deliberate, and approached the young men. Her eyes swept over each of them and then turned to Yegor. True strength, she thought, wasn't just in hunting, but in guiding the spirit of her people, in finding a balance between audacity and prudence, ensuring that the flame of hope continued to warm everyone, without burning anyone. She knew she would need all her skills to weave a solution that honored everyone and kept the village united. An expectant silence hung in the air, heavy as snow. Axinia felt fixed gazes, hope and restlessness mingled. She raised a wrinkled hand, asking for attention. "Boris, my young ones," she began, her voice soft but authoritative. "I understand the thirst for adventure in your hearts. It is the same fire that propelled our ancestors. It is good, guided by wisdom and purpose." She paused, her eyes fixed on Boris, his impatience held in check. "Glory, as Yegor said, is empty if the village goes hungry. The knowledge of our land strengthens our community." Axinia turned to Yegor, a faint smile. "Yegor has the wisdom of years, the prudence that keeps us safe. Youth has energy, vision beyond the horizon. Both are essential threads in the web of our village." She then turned to the young men, her eyes shining. "You want to test skills, bring honor? So be it, but for a greater purpose, one that benefits everyone." Her eyes moved slowly, encompassing everyone. "We need more than meat, knowledge for the mind and unity for the spirit. I propose an expedition, yes, but not a hunt for empty glory. An expedition of exploration and learning. Let the younger ones, with their energy, map trails, identify new, safe hunting grounds, observe animal movements, and perhaps discover new sources of resources." Boris and the other young men exchanged glances, excitement replacing frustration. The exploration seemed grander. "But with one condition," Axinia continued, her voice firm. "This expedition will be led by one of our most experienced elders, who will guide your steps, and each of you will carry a hide notebook and charcoal to record everything. It will be a legacy for future generations, a survival map for the winters to come." Yegor nodded, his eyes fixed on Axinia with admiration. The elder's proposal transformed individual ambition into collective, altruistic effort. The young men, though desiring more freedom, felt the weight of responsibility and the value of the task. Boris, after a moment, stepped forward. "We accept, Axinia," he said, his voice more respectful, his eyes shining with new purpose. A murmur of approval ran through the assembly. The women smiled, relieved. The children, who had observed the tension, returned to playing. Axinia felt a warmth in her chest, deep relief. The flame of hope, she realized, wasn't just about food, but about purpose and unity. Together, they could face any winter. The village had found a new path, a delicate balance between tradition and innovation, guided by the wisdom of the elders and the energy of the young. In the days following Axinia's proposal, a new wave of activity and hope swept through Axinia, the village. The idea of an exploration expedition, rather than a merely ambitious hunt, ignited a different flame in the young men's eyes. Boris, with a gleam of renewed enthusiasm, was the first to volunteer, and two other young hunters, Mikhail and Dmitri, followed his example. The responsibility of leading the journey naturally fell upon Yegor, whose experience and prudence were unquestionable. He accepted the task with his characteristic seriousness, his eyes fixed on Axinia, a silent acknowledgement of her wisdom. Preparation for the expedition was meticulous. Axinia supervised the making of the hide notebooks, where the young men would record their discoveries. The village women prepared extra provisions of dried meat and fat, while the men checked the sleds and tools. Yegor spent hours with Boris, Mikhail, and Dmitri, teaching them to read the most subtle signs in the snow, to interpret the winds, and to identify useful plants and minerals. His gestures were patient, his words, a treasure of ancestral knowledge. Axinia watched it all, feeling a warmth in her chest. It wasn't just an expedition, it was a bridge between generations, a legacy being carefully woven. Departure day arrived, cold and clear. The entire village gathered to say goodbye, their faces marked by apprehension and hope. Axinia embraced each of the young men, her eyes meeting Boris's for a longer moment. Bring not just maps, but stories, she whispered, and return with richer souls. Yegor, with his imposing figure, waved to the village before turning and leading the small group into the white vastness. The sound of sleds gliding over the snow, the barking of the sled dogs, and the figures diminishing on the horizon, all etched themselves into Aksinia's memory. The journey was arduous. Days were short, nights long and icy. Yegor, with his unwavering calm, guided the young men through deep valleys and frozen plains. He taught them the patience of observation, the humility of learning from every track in the snow, the importance of every detail. Boris, who initially yearned for great hunts, found himself meticulously drawing the topography of a new hill, identifying a rock with unusual veins, or observing a raven's flight pattern. The glory of the hunt was replaced by the glory of knowledge. Mikhail and Dmitri, in turn, learned to recognize different types of snow and ice, to build temporary shelters with surprising efficiency, and to read the signs of an impending storm before it manifested. Back in the village, Aksinia felt the absence of the young men, but also the presence of a new energy. The women continued to work on meat preservation, and the children, including Kale, listened to Aksinia's stories with renewed attention, imagining the hunter's adventures. The elder, in her quiet moments, thought of the vastness her young men were exploring, how nature in its indifference offered endless lessons. She knew that her people's true strength lay not just in hunting or resisting the cold, but in the ability to adapt, to learn, and to unite around a greater purpose. The expedition, she realized, wasn't just about finding new resources, but about forging new leaders, instilling new wisdom and strengthening the bonds that kept the village alive. With each passing day, the hope of their return grew, and with it, the certainty that the village would be even richer in spirit and knowledge. Far away, in the relentless vastness of the tundra, Yegor, Boris, Mikhail, and Dmitri's small expedition pressed on. The days were a succession of silent challenges. The biting wind that seemed to want to tear off skin, the treacherous ice that cracked under the sleds, the snow that accumulated in deceptive dunes. Yegor, with his experience, was the group's anchor. His eyes, which had seen countless winters, read the landscape with astonishing precision, identifying safe routes and potential shelters. He taught the young men to feel the change in the snow's texture with their feet, to listen to the wind's whisper that announced a change in weather, to recognize the subtle signs nature offered. Boris, who once yearned for great hunting feats, now dedicated himself with surprising concentration to mapping. His fingers, though gloved, traced careful lines in the hide notebooks, recording every hill, every valley, every rock outcrop. He learned to see beauty in precision, in the utility of the knowledge he was building. Mikhail and Dmitri, in turn, became masters at setting up quick and efficient camps, using snow as insulation and wind as an ally. They communicated with glances and gestures, a silent synchronicity born of necessity and mutual trust. On a particularly grey afternoon, as they crossed a vast frozen plain, the sky, which had seemed merely overcast, suddenly darkened. A distant howl, not of a wolf, but of the wind itself, began to grow. Yegor stopped, raising his hand. His eyes narrowed, and a deep furrow appeared on his brow. "The wind is changing," he said, his voice grave, almost swallowed by the rising sound. "A snowstorm is coming, and it will be relentless. We need to find shelter, and fast." The air began to whip with snowflakes that quickly turned into a dense white curtain. Visibility dropped to almost zero. The cold intensified, biting exposed skin and penetrating layers of fur. The sound of the wind turned into a deafening roar, and the world became a furious white mass. Boris, Mikhail, and Dmitri felt panic begin to rise, but Yegor's calm was contagious. "Together!" he shouted, pointing to a dark rock formation barely discernible in the snow mist. Over there! Quick!" They fought against the wind, each step a battle. The sled dogs instinctively strained, their barks muffled by the storm's fury. Upon reaching the rock, Yegor immediately began to dig, instructing the young men where and how to use their shovels to create a protective trench. The work was strenuous, muscles burning under the intense cold. Snow accumulated as quickly as they removed it, but the urgency of the situation propelled them. As the storm roared around them, Axinia in her yurt felt a pang in her chest. A deep uneasiness, a chill that didn't come from the external cold, but from a premonition. Her eyes closed, and she saw the image of a white vastness, of figures struggling against an invisible element. She knew that her young men and Yegor were facing the greatest challenge of their journey. The village, though safe and warm, was linked by an invisible thread to those who ventured out. Ancestral wisdom, she realized, wasn't just about surviving, but about feeling, about the deep connection that bound her people to the land and to each other. The storm outside was a test not just for the hunters, but for the faith and unity of the entire community. The true climax, she felt, wouldn't just be overcoming the storm, but what it would reveal about the inner strength of each one and the unwavering resilience of the human spirit. The roar of the wind was an invisible monster, and the snow, a furious tide that threatened to swallow everything. Yegor, his face covered in ice and his gloved hands gripping the shovel, continued to dig, his movements methodical despite the surrounding fury. Boris, Mikhail, and Dmitri, though exhausted and with trembling muscles, followed his example, adrenaline and fear propelling them. Each shovelful of snow removed was a small victory against the white immensity. Yegor didn't speak much, but his steady gazes and precise gestures were a language of leadership that calmed the young hearts. He taught them to pile the snow in a way that created an effective barrier against the wind, to protect the sled dogs that huddled together, seeking warmth. The rock formation offered partial refuge, but it was their combined effort and discipline that built true protection. Boris, his face marked by snow, felt a deep respect for Yegor. The glory of the hunt seemed insignificant now. True honor lay in surviving, in protecting one's own, in following the wisdom of one who had faced 1,000 winters. Mikhail and Dmitri, side by side, felt their bond strengthen, a silent connection that transcended words, born of shared adversity. In the village, Axinia couldn't shake the tightness in her chest. The wind howled outside her yurt, and each gust seemed to carry a lament. She sat by the fire, her eyes fixed on the dancing flames, seeking comfort and answers in her people's ancient beliefs. Kyle, sensing the elder's unease, nestled close to her, his small hand touching hers. Axinia stroked the boy's hair, a gesture that sought to calm herself as much as him. She knew that faith was a shield as powerful as the thickest firs, and that hope was the warmth that kept the spirit from freezing. The village women, though worried, maintained their routine, preparing more provisions, keeping the fires lit, a silent demonstration of resilience and mutual support. Far away, after hours that felt like an eternity, the wind's roar began to diminish, transforming into a distant moan. The white curtains slowly parted, revealing a pale, star-studded sky, dotted by a silver moon. The storm had passed. Yegor, his body aching, rose from the trench, his tired eyes sweeping the now serene landscape, covered by a fresh, immaculate layer of snow. Boris, Mikhail, and Dmitri followed him, their faces marked by fatigue, but also by a gleam of relief and a new maturity. They had faced the white hell and emerged stronger. The journey back was slower, but imbued with renewed purpose. The hide notebooks, now more precious, contained not just maps, but the story of their triumph. When the small figures appeared on the horizon, the village erupted in a mix of joyful shouts and tears of relief. Axinia, with Kyle by her side, ran to meet them, her slow movements hastened by emotion. She embraced Yegor, then Boris, Mikhail, and Dmitri, feeling the warmth of their bodies, the life that had returned. The young men, once impetuous, now had eyes that had seen the true face of the tundra and the strength of unity. They hadn't brought rare furs, but something far more valuable: knowledge, experience, and the certainty that true glory lay in resilience and human connection. Aksinia's village, once again, proved that the strength of a people lies not just in their ability to survive, but in their unwavering faith in each other and in the wisdom passed down from generation to generation. The reunion was a symphony of emotions. Aksinia, with tear-filled eyes, embraced Yegor, feeling the roughness of his furs and the warmth of his exhausted body. Boris, Mikhail, and Dmitri, their faces marked by wind and fatigue, but with a new gleam in their eyes, were met with tight embraces from their families and friends. The village women, who had kept vigil with silent prayers, now offered warm food and words of affection. Kyle, with childlike curiosity, watched the young hunters, his large eyes absorbing the transformation the tundra had wrought in them. In the days that followed, the village transformed into a center of stories and learning. The hide notebooks, once simple objects, were now precious treasures. Boris, with a seriousness he previously lacked, drew the maps with great care, explaining every hill, every valley, every rock formation they had found. He spoke of animal tracks that weren't for hunting, but for study, of plants that could be used for medicine, of frozen rivers that revealed mineral veins. Mikhail and Dmitri, in turn, shared their experiences with building shelters, the subtle differences in snow and ice, and the importance of reading the wind. They spoke of the fear they felt during the storm, but also of the strength they found in unity and Yegor's calm leadership. Yegor, sitting by the fire, watched his young apprentices with silent pride. He didn't need to speak much. His actions and the young men's newfound maturity were testament to his wisdom. Aksinia, in turn, felt a deep warmth in her chest. The expedition, which began as a way to channel the vibrant energy of youth, had become a pillar of knowledge and unity for the village. The young men hadn't brought rare furs or abundant meat, but they had returned with something far more valuable: a detailed map of their territory, a deeper understanding of nature, and above all, a new comprehension of what it meant to be part of a community. Aksinia's village flourished with this new wisdom. Boris's maps were copied and studied, serving as guides for future hunting and gathering expeditions, making them safer and more efficient. Mikhail and Dmitri's survival techniques were taught to the children, who now played at building small shelters in the snow, imitating the heroes who had faced the winter's fury. Hunger, once a constant shadow, was now a distant memory, replaced by security and abundance, managed with the wisdom Aksinia had instilled. Aksinia, in her later years, watched her village with a serene heart. She saw Kyle, now a little older, listening intently to Yegor and Boris's stories, his eyes shining with the desire to learn. The flame of hope, which he had ignited with her audacity and wisdom in the ice buffalo hunt, not only continued to burn, but spread, warming every heart and lighting the path for future generations. Aksinia's village was more than a collection of yurts in the icy tundra. It was a living testament to human resilience, the strength of unity, and the transformative power of ancestral wisdom. Winter would continue to be relentless, but Aksinia's people, forged in adversity and united by love and knowledge, were ready to face it forever. Years passed like snowflakes in the wind, each bringing its own challenges and lessons, but Aksinia's village remained steadfast, a beacon of resilience in the icy vastness. The elders' wisdom, woven into the tapestries of her stories and the lines of Boris's maps, became the compass that guided every step, every decision of the community. Aksinia, now with completely white hair and even deeper wrinkles, often sat by the central fire of the communal yurt. Her eyes, though a little clouded by time, still shone with the same intelligence and warmth that characterized her. She watched Kyle, who was no longer a boy, but a strong and curious young man with the same thirst for knowledge that Boris and his friends had shown. Kyle, now, was one of Yegor's most diligent students, learning to read the snow, to feel the wind, to respect nature in all its manifestations, absorbing every teaching with reverence. Boris, Mikhail, and Dmitri had become the pillars of the new generation of hunters and explorers. Boris, with his detailed maps and strategic mind, was the master of planning, charting hunting routes with a precision that minimized risks and maximized efficiency. His expeditions were no longer in pursuit of personal glory, but to ensure that every family had food and warmth, an altruistic purpose that guided him. He taught the younger ones the importance of observing, recording, and learning from every footprint in the snow and every whisper of the wind. Mikhail and Dmitri, with their expertise in shelters and survival techniques, ensured the safety of the journeys, transforming each temporary camp into a welcoming refuge against the most intense cold. The village, once on the brink of starvation, now prospered. Hunting was abundant, not by luck, but by careful planning and deep respect for nature. Resources were managed wisely. Furs were traded for essential goods with other tribes, and knowledge flowed freely between generations, a living current of tradition and innovation. The village women, led by Aksinia's daughters and granddaughters, kept traditions alive, teaching children to sew, to cook, to preserve their people's history through songs and legends, weaving the future with threads of the past. Aksinia felt a deep peace, seeing her community so united and strong. She had planted the seed of hope in the darkness of the harshest winter and now reaped the fruits of a village that not only survived but flourished, vibrant and resilient. True strength, she knew, wasn't the ability to dominate nature, but to understand it, to adapt to it, to find harmony even in the most brutal conditions. She had taught that life was a delicate balance, where cunning and empathy were as powerful as a hunter's spear. One afternoon, as the winter sun painted the sky with shades of pink and purple, Kyle, now a young man with a serious demeanor and keen eyes, approached Aksinia, bringing a small gift. It was a necklace made of wolf teeth, carefully polished and strung with reindeer sinews. "For you, Aksinia," he said. His voice matured, but his young eyes still full of sincere admiration. "To remind us all that true strength isn't in fighting against nature, but in understanding it, in coexisting with it, in finding our place in its grand design." Aksinia took the necklace, her wrinkled fingers brushing against the cold, smooth teeth. A soft, deep smile spread across her face, a smile that carried the wisdom of countless winters and the satisfaction of a life well lived. She knew that her message had been received, that her legacy was safe in the hands and hearts of future generations, that the flame she had ignited would burn strong. Aksinia's village, in its silent resilience and prosperity, became a living legend for neighboring communities, a testament to the human capacity to find light in the deepest darkness. It was proof that it was possible to transform the most brutal adversity into invaluable wisdom and to build a future of hope and unity, guided by unwavering faith in each other and deep respect for the majesty of life on the tundra. The spirit of Aksinia, the elder who dared to see despair in the eyes of 1,200 wolves and life in a 5,000-kilogram ice buffalo, would continue to warm everyone, forever, like the eternal fire in the center of the yurt, a flame that would never extinguish, keeping alive the essence of her people.